Welcome to Heart of a Shepherd. I am coming to you about 1 week late with this video devotional and several that will follow. I've been traveling, helping to minister to family, and I hope that you'll forgive the tardiness of the devotional today and the following. Our scripture reading today is 1 Chronicles chapter 8 and chapter 9. The title, The Benjaminites and the Genealogy of King Saul. I do invite you, if you haven't already studied with me earlier through my written devotionals at heartofashepherd.com, that you would follow me in the Bible today with 1 Chronicles chapter 8 and 9. Now, our study of genealogies in 1 Chronicles began with Adam, the first man. He's mentioned in 1 Chronicles chapter 1 and verse 1. And then you might remember that it moved on to the sons of Noah and their ancestors. And then the post-Diluvian period after the flood, the Lord called Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees. Of course, that's recorded in Genesis 11. And God made a covenant with Abraham. Now, God said that through him, Abraham, and his descendants, all families of the earth would be blessed. Well, we know from the scriptures that to Abraham was born Isaac, 1 Chronicles 1, 27 and verse 34, and his son Jacob, who would later be called Israel. Now, he was the father of the 12 sons. Now, that brings us to 1 Chronicles 8, which concludes our study of the genealogies of the 12 tribes of Israel and returns to the lineage of Benjamin, Jacob's 12th son. Or 12th born son. Now, Benjamin was also the brother of Joseph, born to Rachel, Jacob's favored wife. Now, I'm unsure why the historian revisited the tribe of Benjamin, whose lineage is partly documented in 1 Chronicles 7. Nevertheless, we're given a detailed account of Saul's lineage, Israel's first king, chapter 8, verses 29 through 40. Now, Saul and his sons are listed in chapter 8 and verse 33, and the lineage of his son Jonathan continues starting in chapter 8, verse 34. Now, we also find the son of Jonathan, named Meribah or Baal, 1 Chronicles 8:34, is believed to be none other than Mephibosheth. Now, Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, his nurse dropped him when she was fleeing from the palace, and as a result, he was lame the rest of his life. Now, the lineage of Benjamin then ends with a historian noting that the Benjaminites were famous for their military skill. We read in verse 40, they were mighty men of valor, archers, and had many sons and sons, and 150. All these are the sons of Benjamin. That brings us to 1 Chronicles 9. And so our study of the genealogies of Jacob's sons, who were the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel, concluded with chapter 8. Now, 1 Chronicles 9 begins with a summary statement, and I quote, "So all Israel were reckoned by genealogies, and behold, they were written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah, who were carried away to Babylon for their transgression," that is, for their sin. So the Babylonian captivity was due to what? The sins of Israel. Well, with these words, our study of Israel's history now will move from the reigns of the kings in Israel and Judah to the Jews' return from Babylonian captivity. Now, I wanted to remind you that this book of Chronicles is, as its name suggests, it's a history book. And so, chronologically, we're looking at passages of Scripture here in 1 Chronicles 8 and 9 that correlate or parallel those that we're studying in other portions of Scripture, particularly 2 Samuel, as well as in the Psalms. Notice then with me the Israelites, chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. Now, this is what we know regarding the Chronicles that we find here. In Ezra chapter 1 and verses 1 and 2, we have the decree of King Cyrus of Persia. Now, he had authorized that the Jews return from Babylonian captivity to their homeland, that is to Israel, and there they would begin rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. Now you'll notice in 1 Chronicles 9 that it lists the names of the tribes, the families, and the heads of households who returned from the Babylonian exile and resettled in Canaan. Now obviously we're going to be studying that in future devotionals. Now also consider that 5 tribes were represented in the families that ultimately repopulated Jerusalem: Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh, 1 Chronicles 9, verse 3. Now, the mention of Ephraim and Manasseh is notable. Why? Because they were among the 10 tribes of northern Israel that were taken captive by Assyria. And so when the captivities began, Assyria was the first to attack Israel, taking the 10 tribes, the 7 to the north, the 3 or 2.5 on the east side of the Jordan. Now, also chronicled in 1 Chronicles 9, verses 10 through 13, we also have the priests. And so among those who would return later to Jerusalem were priests whose names were recorded by families and household heads. Now, in verses 14 through 34, we have the duties of the priest and the Levites that are noted. Now, the priests were, we see, assisted by Levites who served as musicians. That's found in chapter 9, verses 14 through 16. They also served as porters, that is, keepers or guards or security of the gates of the tabernacle, verse 17 through 23. We also have the porters or gatekeepers supervised the temple chambers and the treasuries, verse 24 through 32. And notice also that some Levites took care of and prepared temple vessels and items used in worship and sacrifice, 28 through verse 32. And then also singers are also mentioned in verse 33. Now, because Saul would be the first king, we have his genealogy recorded beginning in verse 35 through verse 44. Now, 1 Chronicles 9 then ends with the historian recording King Saul's genealogy and that of his sons. Now we're going to put a pause there. We're going to end this study, but we will continue in some video devotionals that will follow this and studying the unfolding of history, which reminds us again that God is sovereign and He is the ruler not only of heaven, but also of earth. Thank you for being a part of Heart of a Shepherd, and bye-bye.